tried this out using a computer. You can actually do it. You make a little model of how they bounce, and you make the desired initial changes. Of course, you have to know what changes to make. And then sure enough, the bouncing atoms will come together and form letters and spell out a message. So the point is, the change you have to make in the motions in order to get that message to come out a fraction of a second later are so small that they would be completely unmeasurable, even in principle. So the idea then is that it is perfectly possible to have control of the transformations of matter by a higher intelligence, if you simply grant the possibility introduced into the material substrate. So if you go back again to this idea of a unified field in physics, the physicists are striving for this concept of a single continuum, which is the basis of all different material equation representing all the different laws of physics. So if you postulate not only this field, but also an all-pervading agency that can produce controlled but exceedingly minute variations in the pattern of this field, then this allows for all the different phenomena of the material universe to be controlled and directed by this intelligent agency. So, of course, in the Vedic literature, it is in fact proposed that the supersoul is expanded throughout the material continuum and is able to exert such control. So the conclusion then is that there actually is a compatibility between the picture you find in the Vedic literature of the relation between God and the material energy and the concepts of modern physics. Basically, one could conclude that modern physicists were misled by the metaphor of the universe as a clock. In fact, it's interesting, if you examine the physics of a clock, you'll find that you don't have exponential amplification phenomena in a clock. In fact, they're designed so that you don't have that. Because, of course, if you did have it, the clock wouldn't keep accurate time. So, if you examine the equations, you'll see there's no amplification. If you make a change of a given magnitude, then later on it only produces a change of more or less that magnitude. It doesn't amplify. In fact, it even tends to decrease. The metaphor of the universe as a clock then eliminated the idea of control. But it's discovered that actually the laws of physics are not like that. They allow for this exponential amplification. So it actually is possible to have a supreme intelligence controlling the transformations of matter. So another consequence of this is it's also possible to have a non-physical mind that interacts with the brain. So, because there's an analogy between the relation between God and the universe as a whole and the individual conscious self and the body. So that was basically what I wanted to outline. Actually, these ideas should be widely disseminated because people are still very much, especially in academic circles, scientific circles, also in most of the major religions of today, the Catholic and so-called liberal Protestant denominations and so forth, the idea is very solidly established that you really can't have God controlling what matter is doing from moment to moment. So, are there any comments? Yeah?
You mentioned Aristoteles, and that he had an idea similar to the Vedic idea.
Yeah.
I thought he was kind of the beginner of the modern Western, more mechanistic point of existence, as an opposite to Plato, and more transcendental point of view. How does he relate? Did he actually start this, the modern science for the modern minds in the Middle Age? Do they actually go back to Aristotle?
Well, of course, a number of points can be made there. The development of modern empiricism and the scientific approach to nature has been traced back to the reintroduction of Aristotle's writings into European thought. During the Middle Ages, the writings of Aristotle were lost, but the Arabs retained them. So then, in the Renaissance period, the different writings attributed to Aristotle were reintroduced into Europe, and the actual result of that was that many people at least, began to focus on the study of nature and the development of material technology and so forth. At least some scholars have argued that this can be traced to Aristotle, whereas Plato had a more mystical orientation, which was stressed during the medieval period in Europe. So, at the same time, there are some obvious similarities between Aristotle's ideas and certain Vedic ideas, from the Sankhya philosophy in particular. Of course, that doesn't mean that there's a historical relationship. That would just be basically speculative, but it's quite possible that there was a historical relationship. In fact, there was undoubtedly communication between India and ancient Greece, for example. Yeah?
When you make this historical background to come to the point of modern science, I wonder if it's needed to have those concepts, even with a simple clock explanation. Can we not introduce still the Vedic concept? In other words, is it needed that science is developing that way?
Well, we're dealing here with ideas. First of all of the theories in modern science, certainly all theories expressed in universal terms, that is, universal laws of nature and so forth, these are all simply ideas. No one has ever proven that any of these things are absolutely true. For example, here we have all this electronics which is now functioning, presumably in a reliable way. So this is all based on Maxwell's equations, amongst other things. And it seems that it works very nicely. But that doesn't prove that Maxwell's equations are universally true. Although every time one of these machines works, it gives more confirmation that those equations actually apply. So in dealing with these theories, we're merely talking about ideas. However, ideas can have a very strong effect on people. People basically, in fact, deal with ideas. They don't deal with actual reality. It's hard to know what is there in actual reality, whereas ideas are easily communicated. So people mainly are concerned with ideas. So these particular theoretical ideas that I was discussing here have had a very important impact on people's thinking. And basically what we're trying to do with the preaching of Krishna consciousness is reverse many of these very ingrained ideas of Western thinking. Inevitably, we have to do that. Now, it is part of the tradition of the preaching of Krishna consciousness throughout the centuries that when there are ideas that are fundamentally opposed to the principles of Krishna consciousness, the Vaishnava acharyas work very hard to counteract those ideas. For example, there's the Mayavadi philosophy. Now, the Mayavadi philosophy is contrary to the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. And you will see that Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and so on and so forth, went to great lengths to show that the Mayavadi philosophy is wrong. That's been going on right down to the present day. Also, Srila Prabhupada had a lot to say about the Mayavadi philosophy. So ideas are important, even though they're merely ideas. Obviously, most people who think in terms of the Mayavadi philosophy have never perceived anything such as Brahman, Brahman is merely an abstract concept to them. They certainly haven't realized anything. But the idea has such an influence on them that it blocks them from accepting the principles of bhakti. Therefore, in order to help people who are influenced by these Mayavadi principles, one goes to great length to explain why those ideas are wrong and what the right idea is. So it's a similar situation with physics. Since the time of Newton and Galileo and so forth, physical science has been dominated by this concept that everything is occurring deterministically according to certain laws, and that this really eliminates supernatural events from any possibility of actual reality. So people are very greatly influenced by this. So inevitably, we are opposing those ideas simply by preaching Krishna consciousness. However we do it, we're opposing those ideas. Anyone who takes seriously to the world view of Krishna consciousness is essentially rejecting these mechanistic concepts of modern science, no matter how it comes about. So, therefore, it's helpful to understand systematically how these ideas are working. You see, one way to eliminate a set of ideas that oppose the philosophy of Krishna consciousness is just to say, well, that's wrong and we don't deal with that. However, some people may not find that to be very satisfactory. They want more of an explanation. So the explanation actually can be provided. Now, you asked about the 19th century clockwork picture of the universe. Actually, that is quite incompatible with the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. So if people are adhering to that picture of what is going on in nature, then to them Krishna consciousness must be wrong, inasmuch as they're adhering to that. So one would then have to say, well, that picture of things is wrong. One way to do this is just say, well, it's wrong, and that's it. So it's perhaps helpful, however, to see how it is wrong and see to what extent laws of physics can be true and not contradict Krishna consciousness. Because after all, we do have all these technical devices, such as this video camera here, which operate very precisely according to these physical laws. This gives people a great deal of faith that these physical laws actually are something real. So it turns out that there is compatibility between the laws of physics and the basic principles of Krishna consciousness. And it's therefore useful for people to understand this. Concerning the whole question of how complicated all this is, it is a fact that most of what you encounter in physical science, in things like physics, electronics, chemistry, all these things, most of this is quite complicated. That's the nature of the subject matter. Many of the underlying ideas are very simple, but when you actually apply them in practical situations, you find that things become very complicated. However, these complicated ideas have a strong impact on what people are led to believe. For example, in universities today, people are taught that the mind is simply a manifestation of the brain. And what is the basic reason for that? It turns out, that there's plenty of evidence that the mind is not just a manifestation of the brain. You can find a lot of evidence, and in later discussions I'll present some of that also. But because this contradicts basic physical principles, or what scientists tend to think are basic physical principles, they reject the idea that there's a mind which is distinct from the brain and is interacting with it. So these ideas have a very strong grip on people's thinking.
When we understand the laws of karma, we could as well, there's a set of action and reaction going on in this world, but that those laws, although being able to express them by physical equations.